The castle of Arvenhold sat on the edge of a jagged cliff, its towers clawing at the stormy sky. Dark clouds rolled across the horizon, casting long shadows over the ancient stone walls. Inside, the grand hall was alive with flickering torches, their golden light reflecting on suits of armor and the faces of nobles who whispered quietly, careful not to disturb the king. King Alaric, ruler of Arvenhold for over 30 years, was not a man easily seen without reverence. He wore his crown like a weight, his eyes sharp and commanding. Yet, tonight, there was something different about him. He seemed smaller, though still formidable, as if the shadows of his years were finally claiming him. The king's voice rang through the hall like a bell, cold and firm. "Send Lady Alara to me." The announcement caused a ripple of murmurs. Alara, daughter of a minor noble family, had been known for her intelligence and quiet dignity. She was clever enough to survive the dangerous games of court and proud enough to resist unnecessary flattery. Yet when the summons came, she could not refuse. She entered the hall with steady steps, her gown flowing like liquid silver in the torchlight. Every eye seemed to follow her, but she did not bow too low, nor curtsy too deep. She carried herself with quiet strength. The king sat upon his throne, carved from blackened oak and engraved with ancient runes. His eyes, dark and piercing, met hers as she approached. There was a strange tension in the room, a feeling that something unseen was moving among the shadows. "Lady Alara," the king said, his voice softer than she expected, it still filled with authority. "I do not have much time left." Alara's brow furrowed. "Your Majesty?" she asked, though her voice was calm. She had faced many demands from nobles and strangers alike, but the weight in his words unsettled her. "I have 1 year. Perhaps less," the king continued, leaning forward slightly. "A curse has been laid upon me, one that will take my life if I do not produce an heir. I need a child, and I need it soon. You may ask why I chose you? You are clever, strong, and noble enough to survive the life you will be given at my side." Alara felt a chill creep along her spine. She had heard whispers of the curse that haunted the royal family, a shadow that had stolen lives and broken dynasties. To be asked to step into the king's bed for duty alone would be one thing, but the king's eyes betrayed a deeper layer, a hidden desperation she could not ignore. "You want me to?" She began searching for words. "Yes," he interrupted, but there was no anger in his tone. Only truth. "Give me an heir, and you may have everything: power, land, freedom, within this kingdom. Refuse, and you will have nothing, for the crown does not forgive hesitation." Alara felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. Here was a man who could command armies, punish enemies, and yet he now asked her for something more intimate than any battlefield could demand. And yet beneath his power, she glimpsed loneliness, a wound the kingdom had never healed. A man trapped in the expectation of duty and bloodline. "I need time," she said carefully, keeping her voice steady, "to consider this ... arrangement." The king's eyes softened for just a moment, though his posture remained regal. "Time is a luxury we do not have," he said. "You may think this is about duty alone, Lady Alara, but it is also about survival mine and the kingdom's. If I fall, the lands will descend into chaos. Noble families will fight. Innocent lives will be lost." Alara took a slow breath. Her mind raced. To refuse the king could be dangerous, not just for her, but for her family. Yet to accept was to bind herself to a man whose heart was a fortress of shadows. And still, she could not deny a thread of curiosity, a desire to understand the man who carried both fear and power in equal measure. "Very well," she said finally, her voice steady. "I will hear more. I will listen to what you ask of me." The king inclined his head, and for the first time a small spark of relief flickered in his eyes. "Then listen closely," he said, rising from his throne. The room seemed to grow smaller, the air heavier. He stepped down the throne platform and approached her. "You must understand that this is not mere courtly ceremony. The curse is ancient, cruel, and merciless. It is tied to blood and will not forgive deception or failure. There is more at stake than you imagine." Alara's fingers twitched at her sides. She had never felt so aware of her own mortality, so conscious of the weight of every choice. Yet beneath her fear, something stirred, something dangerous and unfamiliar. A sense of challenge, a spark of courage that she had only glimpsed in dreams where she dared to stand. Against fate itself, the king's voice lowered, almost to a whisper, yet it carried across the hall like a wind through empty corridors. I am not merely asking for obedience. I am asking for trust, for courage, and for companionship in the dark days to come. Lara's eyes met his. In them she saw something unexpected, vulnerability. Not weakness exactly, but a raw openness that frightened her more than any threat could. The king, feared by all, was pleading not for loyalty, but for understanding, for connection. Then he stepped back and extended a hand, not commanding her to touch, but offering. In his palm rested a small, intricate amulet, forged from black iron and set with a single crimson gem. This amulet binds the bearer to the crown. Take it, and you accept the weight of the kingdom and my life. Refuse, and you walk away with nothing, and perhaps with regret. Alara stared at the amulet, its dark surface catching the torchlight, reflecting both fire and shadow. Her mind reeled with possibilities, dangers, and promises. This was no ordinary choice. It was a crossroads where lives, loyalty, and love might intersect in ways she could not yet imagine. Finally, she lifted her hand, hesitated, and let her fingers hover over the cold metal. Her heart pounded in her chest. She understood that accepting it would change her life forever. The very air seemed charged, humming with magic and fate. I will accept, she said softly. Though her voice carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions, the king's eyes darkened with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something else she could not name. He did not speak immediately, only watched her, as if memorizing every detail of her face, her posture, the very essence of her courage. Then, in a voice both commanding and almost tender, he said, "Then come with me. The hour is late, but the work begins at dawn. You must learn the ways of the court, the secrets of the curse, and the dangers that lie in every shadow. Only then can you understand what you have agreed to." Lara nodded, a strange excitement stirring beneath her apprehension. She followed him through towering corridors, lit by flickering torches and lined with tapestries that depicted the kingdom's bloody history. Each step felt like crossing into another world, a place where magic and power, fear and desire coexisted in fragile balance. As she entered the private chambers, the king turned to her one last time, his voice low and urgent. "Remember, Lady Lara, you are not only choosing to stay in this castle, you are choosing to walk beside a man who has known nothing but power and isolation. The road will not be easy, and the nights will be long. But if you succeed, we may yet defy fate together." The room fell silent, except for the crackle of the hearth. Ilara held the amulet close, feeling its cold weight against her palm. She understood now that the story of her life, and perhaps of the entire kingdom, had changed with a single word. She had accepted the king's ultimatum. Outside, lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the castle's towers like jagged swords. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying a promise and a warning. The next year would be filled with shadows, choices, and dangers that would test the heart, the mind, and the very soul of Lady Alara. And in the deepest chamber of the castle, King Alaric watched her with eyes that had not known hope for decades. For the first time, he dared to imagine a future where the curse might be broken, and a connection deeper than power, deeper than blood, might bloom in the darkness, but both knew, silently and fully, that the hour was late, and the road ahead would demand everything. The castle of Arvenhold slept uneasily under the weight of storm clouds, its towers piercing the darkened sky. Even in the quiet of night, there was a tension that hummed through the stone halls, a restless energy that refused to settle. Lady Alara could feel it as she walked through the corridors, her footsteps soft against the cold stone floors. Since accepting the king's amulet, she had felt the subtle shift in the castle's air. The torches flickered more violently, shadows stretched longer, and whispers of the past seemed to brush against her ears. She did not speak of it to anyone. Superstition ran deep in the court, and fear could turn whispers into weapons. King Alaric met her at the gates of the private gardens the next morning, the first light of dawn casting silver over his dark armor. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, watched her closely. "You have slept," he said, his voice calm, yet edged with an unspoken urgency. "But the curse does not rest, and neither may we." Alara adjusted the amulet around her neck. The crimson gem caught the first rays of sunlight, gleaming like a heartbeat against her chest. She nodded, silently acknowledging the weight of the task she had undertaken. "I am ready, Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady. Yet inside, her heart raced with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He led her through the garden, a place of wild beauty where roses grew with thorns sharper than daggers and ivy twisted, like living serpents around stone pillars. Here, in the quiet of nature, the king began to speak of the curse, his words slow and deliberate, as though each one carried the weight of centuries. "The curse is old," he said, his gaze distant. "Older than the walls of this castle, older than my own bloodline. It was set upon my family for betrayal and pride. The last king sought to claim power without thought for life or love. The gods or whatever watches from above chose to punish us. It is not simply a matter of dying. It is a matter of legacy and life itself." Lara listened carefully, each word sinking into her mind. She had been raised to value intelligence and strategy, but even she felt the chill of fear creep along her spine. This was no ordinary threat. It was ancient, insidious, and alive. "And the heir," she asked softly, "is the only way to end it?" Alaric's eyes, dark as storm clouds, met hers. "Yes, blood alone can bind the curse and end its reach. But it is not enough to conceive a child. The child must carry my line and my intention. It is tied to something deeper, something I have not yet been able to explain even to myself." Lara's brow furrowed. She felt a mix of dread and fascination. A child of the king was not merely a symbol. It was a key, a link to survival and power. And yet it also carried the weight of destiny, magic, and shadow. They walked in silence for a while, the soft sound of the wind rustling leaves filling the gaps. Then the king stopped before a fountain carved of black stone, its waters still as glass despite the morning breeze. He looked at her intently. "I am not a man who asks lightly. You must understand the danger, Lady Alara. The curse will test us, twist us, show us what we fear most about ourselves. Many have tried to defy it and failed. I will not fail," Alara said firmly, though her chest tightened with the truth that she did not know what failure might truly mean. Alaric's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "I do not doubt your courage. But courage alone may not be enough. The curse has its own will. It is not kind nor fair. It seeks the deepest fear of the heart and uses it like a blade." The wind stirred, and for a moment the water in the fountain rippled as though touched by unseen hands. Alara felt a shiver run through her. The world she had entered was not one of simple politics or courtly intrigue. It was alive with power she could barely understand. That night she could not sleep. The amulet at her neck pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and in the quiet darkness, she thought she heard whispers carried on the wind. They spoke of loss, of regret, of choices that could destroy or redeem. And though she could not see anything, she felt the presence of the curse, watching her, testing her, waiting for her to falter. Days passed, and Alara learned the rhythm of the castle. She attended the king in council, watched the courtiers maneuver for favor, and explored the hidden corners of Arvenhold. Everywhere she went, shadows seemed deeper, corners darker. She began to understand the subtle ways the curse twisted life around the king plants withered in his presence. Servants faltered for no reason, and the air seemed thick with invisible tension. Yet in all of this, she began to see the man beneath the crown. Alone in the library one evening, she found him poring over ancient texts. A book of spells and old prophecies opened before him. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced the worn pages. When he noticed her, he did not startle or command her away. Instead, he offered her a small, wry smile. "You are curious? said, a hint of humor in his voice, though it quickly vanished. Most come to this place with ambition or greed. Few seek to understand. Lara stepped closer, studying the delicate patterns of writing that covered the page. I want to know, she said simply. I want to understand what I have agreed to. The king nodded, almost as if relieved that someone at last was willing to see him as more than a figure of fear. Then learn well, he said. This is no ordinary curse. It will not yield to power or wealth. It yields only to understanding, courage, and perhaps two hearts willing to see each other clearly, even in darkness. Lara felt her pulse quicken at his words. There was a meaning there she could not yet grasp, a tension that prickled beneath the surface of formality and duty. Something unspoken, something dangerous, yet achingly human. Days became nights, and nights became tests. One evening, a storm swept over Arvenhold, wind tearing at the castle's banners and lightning slicing the sky. The king summoned Alara to the highest tower, where the walls had been carved with runes meant to ward off dark magic. Tonight, he said, his voice low and urgent, the curse will show itself more clearly than ever. You must watch and learn. Do not fear, but do not ignore what you see. The shadows are not always what they appear to be. They stood together as the storm raged, the wind howling around them, rain lashing the stone. The king held her hand briefly, a touch that startled them both, grounding them amidst the chaos. Then, as lightning struck a distant spire, shadow twisted across the courtyard below, moving with unnatural speed and purpose. Ilara gasped. The figure was indistinct, shifting, and yet she could feel its malevolence, its hunger for chaos. The king's face was pale but calm, his hands steady on hers. The curse tests more than me, he said. It tests you. Your courage, your strength, your heart. Together, they watched as the shadow moved through the castle. And though it vanished as quickly as it appeared, its presence lingered. The king's eyes met hers, a silent question passing between them. Could she face what was coming? Could she endure the darkness and still remain herself? Alara's grip on the amulet tightened. She realized that this year, this cursed year, would not only decide the king's fate, but hers as well. And in that realization, something shifted. Fear was still there, yes, but beneath it, a spark of resolve. She would not be broken. She would learn the ways of the curse. She would face the shadows. The king, seeing her determination, allowed himself a moment of quiet hope. For the first time in decades, he dared to imagine a future where the curse might be challenged, where someone beside him could withstand its trials. And perhaps in that trial, they could find not just survival, but something deeper, a connection that neither duty nor fear could undo yet. As the storm raged and the shadows flickered, neither of them could know what horrors or revelations waited them in the nights to come. The curse had begun its true work, and it would demand everything: trust, courage, and hearts willing to face the darkness together. The castle of Arvenhold seemed smaller now, its walls no longer merely stone and mortar, but a cage that held both the king and Lady Alara under the weight of an unseen threat. The mark burned faintly on Alara's palm, a constant reminder that the curse was not a distant threat. It was alive, watching, shaping every step they took. King Alaric summoned her to the private library once more, a room filled with towering shelves of ancient tomes. Dust and candle smoke mingled in the air, giving the chamber a timeless scent, and the faint flicker of firelight made the shadows seem alive. Ilara, the king said, his voice low, the curse will not yield to hope alone. Knowledge is as vital as courage. There are those who can help, but few can be trusted. We must seek them if we are to survive the year. Lara nodded. She had already learned that fear alone could not guide them. Strength of mind and clarity of heart were required. Who can we trust? She asked. Alaric paused. There are exiles, prophets, and sorcerers who once served the kingdom. Some fled when my father tightened his grip. Others disappeared into the wilds, fearing the curse. They know secrets hidden even from me, but they are dangerous, and some will demand more than we can give. The idea of venturing outside the castle walls both terrified and thrilled her. The world beyond Arvenhold was said to be wild, untamed, and magical. Yet she sensed that the king had no choice. The curse had begun its subtle attacks, servants falling ill for no reason, shadows moving in places they should not, dreams that whispered warnings. Their first journey took them to the ruins of an old temple in the forest, abandoned for decades. The forest itself seemed alive, the branches twisted like hands, and the air heavy with unseen eyes. As they entered the ruins, a hush fell over the world. As though even nature held its breath, a figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in gray. "You seek knowledge," the stranger said, voice rough like gravel. "But knowledge comes with a price." Alaric stepped forward, his usual commanding presence undimmed despite the urgency. "We have no choice," he said. "The curse threatens more than my life. It threatens the kingdom itself. Will you help us?" The strangers studied them, eyes sharp and discerning. Perhaps they said slowly, "But know this, the curse tests not only the body but the heart. Those who face it must confront their deepest fears, and even then, the shadows may not yield." Ilara's hand tightened around the amulet at her neck. She felt both fear and determination. The path ahead would be dangerous, but it was the only path to hope. Inside the temple, the stranger revealed texts and relics that spoke of the curse's origin. It was older than Arvenhold itself, a punishment woven into the very bloodline of the king. It demanded more than obedience. It required understanding, compassion, and sacrifice. The air was not enough, it was the intention, and courage behind the child that could truly break the curse. Alaric listened silently, the shadows of guilt and regret in his eyes. He had always relied on power and fear to command. But this required something different: humility, trust, and reliance on another's strength. And for the first time he realized how much he needed Eleron just to conceive an heir. But to face the darkness beside him. Their nights at the ruins were tense. Strange lights flickered in the forest, and whispers carried on the wind warned of danger. Ilara could not sleep, nor could the king. They would sit together near the dying embers of the fire, sharing words that felt more intimate than any council discussion. She began to see the man behind the throne, a man who had loved, lost, and endured more than she could imagine. And he began to see her not as a duty or obligation, but as someone whose courage and intelligence matched his own. One night, as the moon cast silver light across the ruins, the shadow of the curse appeared again. It slithered across the stones, darker than any night, moving with intent. Alaric stepped in front of Ilara, his hand brushing hers in a protective gesture. "Do not fear it," he whispered, "but do not underestimate it. The curse tests more than skill. It tests the heart. You must not falter." Ilara's breath caught. "I will not," she said. Though even she felt the chill of the shadow pressing against them, the shadow advanced, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving a faint whisper behind. "You cannot hide from destiny." Ilara looked at the king, his dark eyes reflecting both worry and hope. "It is learning," he said quietly. "It understands that we are aware. That is why it moves more cautiously." They spent days seeking knowledge, visiting forgotten temples, speaking to exiled sorcerers, and reading ancient scrolls that smelled of dust and magic. Each encounter tested their courage, their patience, and their ability to trust one another. The more they faced, the closer they grew, just as king and subject. But as two hearts entwined by necessity and courage, one evening, after a long day deciphering a prophecy in the ruins of an old watchtower, Ilara and the king found themselves alone. The wind howled outside, rattling the stones, and rain began to tap against the broken roof. "Ilara," the king said softly, "there is something I have never shared with anyone, not even my advisors. Not even my closest allies." She looked at him, curiosity and concern intertwining. "What is it?" He hesitated, a rare vulnerability touching his features. "The curse. It is not only upon me. It seeks the weakness in those around me as well. Those who try to help, who love, who hope they are all at risk. I have caused pain to many in my life, and this curse, it magnifies that. You are brave, Alara, but I fear for you as much as I fear for myself." Her heart ached at his words. She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing against the calluses of a man who had lived a lifetime of duty and battle. "We face it together," she said. "I am not afraid, not when I am with you." The king studied her, his eyes searching for a hint of doubt, but finding none. For the first time in years, he felt something he had long forgotten: hope. Not hope born of power or strategy, but hope born of trust, of connection, of the understanding that even in the darkest curse, two hearts could stand together. Yet even in that moment, the curse did not rest. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the lanterns around them, and in the darkness, Alara felt the familiar chill of the shadow. It moved closer, pressing against the walls. A reminder that their journey was far from over. Alaric placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We must be ready," he said. "The curse will grow stronger. Its tests will not be gentle, and the choices we make will shape not only our lives, but the fate of the kingdom itself." Alara nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come this far, faced the shadows, and learned the weight of the king's secrets. She would not falter now. Together, they could endure the curse, confront its power, and perhaps, if the gods or fates allowed, break it entirely. The night stretched long, and as the storm raged around the ruins, they sat side by side, sharing silence and strength. Neither spoke of fear, for they both understood that words were insufficient. The bond between them had grown, forged in danger, trust, shared understanding. And yet, as the first light of dawn touched the edges of the forest, a new threat became clear. Among the ancient trees, a figure watched them, hidden in shadow. Its intentions were unknown, but the eyes glowed with a strange, unnatural light. The curse was not the only danger in the world. Others, drawn by power, by fear, and by desire, had begun to stir. Alara's hand instinctively went to the amulet at her neck. She felt its weight, its pulse, and a strange warmth that reminded her that she was no longer alone in this battle. The king's presence beside her was steadying. "A lighthouse in the storm. Whoever that is," she whispered. Voice tense, "They are not of the forest." Alaric's gaze followed hers, his expression hardening. "No," he said, his voice low and resolute, "and they will not remain unseen for long. We must prepare. The curse is only the beginning. Forces beyond it are awakening, and they will test us in ways we cannot yet imagine." Alara swallowed hard, her heart pounding not from fear, but from anticipation. This was no longer just about surviving the curse. It was about facing a world filled with shadows, secrets, and unseen enemies. And through it all, she realized something she had not dared to admit. She did not want to face it alone. The king looked at her, eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent warmth through her chest. "Together, then," he said simply. "Whatever comes, we face it together." And in that moment, amidst ancient ruins, whispering winds, and the faint glow of unseen eyes, they knew that the bond they had formed, born of duty, courage, and necessity, was stronger than fear, stronger than shadows, and perhaps stronger than the curse itself. The forest outside Arvenhold had grown dark with an unnatural stillness, as if the world itself held its breath. The hidden figure from the ruins now stood before King Alaric and Lady Alara, its hood thrown back to reveal sharp, calculating eyes. The shadow of the curse hung heavy in the air, intertwining with the presence of this new threat. "You dare to defy fate," the figure said, voice echoing like steel on stone. "The king and his chosen one. It's very well. Let the true test begin." Alaric stepped forward, his armor glinting faintly in the pale light. "We do not fear fate," he said, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "We face it together." Alara adjusted the amulet at her neck, feeling its faint pulse against her chest. The mark on her palm burned, a reminder that the curse had chosen her. But the king's presence beside her was a shield stronger than any stone wall, a beacon of courage she had not expected to find. The figure raised a hand, and suddenly the forest seemed alive. Shadows twisted into monstrous shapes, their forms fluid, impossible to comprehend. The air thickened, pressing against them as though the world itself opposed their steps. "The curse tests more than courage," Alaric said quietly to Alara. "It tests trust, sacrifice, and heart. Remember what we have learned. Fear is the weapon of shadows. Strength is our shield." Laron nodded, though her heart pounded. She had faced shadows and storms, wild forests, and whispered threats. But this felt different. This was not merely magic or cursed. It was a trial that touched the deepest parts of their souls. The figure spoke again, its voice sharp as a blade. "If you hope to survive, you must confront not only the curse but yourselves. One false move, one doubt, and all will be lost." The king and Alara moved forward side by side. As they advanced, the shadows shifted, whispering fears that clawed at their minds, images of failure, of death, of loss. The king's grip on his sword tightened, and Alara's fingers brushed against his arm, drawing courage from the unspoken connection between them. "This way," Alaric said, leading her toward the ruins of an ancient altar at the forest's center. The altar, carved from black stone and etched with glowing runes, pulsed with an energy that made the air thrum. This was the heart of the curse, the place where the shadow's power was strongest. Alara's eyes scanned the area. The figure followed, watching, silent now, as if the true test would be revealed in action rather than words. At the altar, Alaric knelt and traced the glowing runes with his fingers. "The curse seeks to control life and death, but it fears choice," he said softly. "It fears hearts that are willing to endure and change. That is our weapon." Alara stepped forward, placing her hand atop his. The amulet around her neck pulsed strongly, resonating with the runes. A strange warmth spread through her, and she felt the presence of the curse recoiling, as though uncertain how to respond. "Together," she whispered. The king met her gaze. "Together," he repeated. Then the shadows surged, forming into a single massive shape, a manifestation of the curse itself. Its eyes were darkness, and its voice was the echo of centuries of anger and despair. "You cannot defeat me," it roared. Alaric drew his sword, its steel catching the dim light of the runes. "We do not seek to defeat you with force," he said. "We seek to face you with courage, trust, and truth." Alara stepped forward, lifting her hand above the altar. The amulet glowed brightly, and she spoke the words the exiled sorcerers had taught her. The words that carried the intention of life, hope, and renewal. The curse twisted and shrieked, recoiling from the warmth of her voice, from the truth of her heart. For a moment, the shadows wavered, unsure, and Alaric pressed his hand against hers, strengthening the bond between them. "We are not alone," he said. "We face this together. Not as king and subject, but as hearts willing to endure, to change, to protect life itself." The shadows shrieked again, the forest shaking as it writhed and twisted. Alara could feel the power of the curse pressing against her mind, tempting her with fear and doubt. But she held fast. She thought of the king, of the kingdom, and of the life they could build if they survived. She thought of hope. "Now!" Alaric shouted, and together they poured their will into the amulet, into the runes, into the altar itself. Light flared, blinding and pure, and the shadow screamed, curling upon itself. Then dissolving into nothingness, silence followed. The air felt lighter, warmer. The weight of fear that had hung over Arvenhold for so long lifted, replaced by a strange calm. The curse was broken not by force, but by courage, trust, and unity. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but elated. Alaric knelt beside her, his hand brushing the sweat from her brow. "You were remarkable," he said, his voice soft, filled with awe and gratitude. "Without you, none of this would have been possible." Alara smiled faintly, the relief and emotion making her chest ache. "We did it together," she said. The king's eyes softened, a vulnerability shining through that few had ever seen. "Yes," he said. "Together, you have shown me more than courage. You have shown me the heart I thought I had lost." For the first time in decades, Alaric allowed himself to feel free of fear, free of the crushing weight of destiny. And as he looked at Alara, he realized something more. She had become not only his ally, but the companion he had longed for, the one who could stand beside him through darkness and light alike. They returned to the castle. The dawn breaking over Arvenhold in golden light. The kingdom itself seemed renewed, as if the land could sense the lifting of the curse. Flowers bloomed where none had before, the air was lighter, and even the people seemed to breathe easier. Freed from the shadow that had pressed upon their lives for so long, in the throne room, Alaric addressed his court. His voice carried authority, but also humility. "The curse that has haunted this kingdom is broken," he said. "Through courage, trust, and unity, we have endured. Let this be a lesson. Power is not only in might, but in heart, in compassion, and in the bonds we forge." Alara stood beside him, her hand brushing his. The courtiers bowed, murmuring in awe, but the king's attention never wavered from her. In her presence, he had found redemption not only for himself, but for the lineage he had feared would end in shadow. That evening, they walked together through the restored gardens. The night was calm, the stars shining clearly above. Alaric reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "You have given me more than life," he said softly. "You have given me hope, trust, and a reason to believe in what comes next. I cannot ask more, yet I wish to offer all that I have to you." Lara looked at him, understanding the depth of his words. "And I will stand with you," she replied. "Not because of duty, not because of obligation, but because I choose to. In darkness, in light, I choose to face it with you." The king's eyes shone with emotion, a mixture of gratitude, awe, and something tender that had long been buried beneath the crown. "Then we face life together," he said. "Whatever may come, we will endure, and we will protect this kingdom, not as ruler and subject, but as hearts united." They stood there for a long moment, hand in hand, the night quiet around them. The trials had been many, the shadows deep, and yet they had endured. And though the whispers of the past would never fully disappear, the future was theirs to shape together. Ilara tightened her grip on the amulet, feeling its pulse calm, steady now. The curse had tested them, shaped them, and almost broken them, but it had also revealed the strength, courage, and bond that could never be undone. The king turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "We have been given a second chance," he said. "Not merely to live, but to love, to protect, and to build a legacy that even the shadows cannot undo." Alara smiled, the weight of fear finally lifting from her shoulders. "Then let us begin," she said, "together." So, under the starlit sky of a kingdom reborn, King Alaric and Lady Alara embraced not only their victory over the curse, but the possibility of a life forged from courage, trust, and the quiet power of hearts united. The shadows had tested them, the darkness had pressed upon them, but in the end, love, resilience, and courage had prevailed. Cliffhanger final hint as they walked back into the castle. The amulet around Alara's neck glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Though the curse had been broken, a faint whisper lingered in the wind. The shadows may retreat, but they never truly vanish. And fate watches still,